Okay, so you're thinking of building a dream home here in New South Wales, huh? Well, you've come to the right place. We've done a serious deep dive into the nitty-gritty of designing a residence here, sifting through a mountain of legalities, environmental factors, and of course, design principles.
Yeah, consider this your express lane to understanding what really matters. We're aiming to give you that aha moment, laying out the essential insights, the must-knows, and you know what often trips people up? It's those seemingly minor local regulations that can really throw a wrench in your big design plan.
Oh, for sure. It's not all picking out fancy tiles and countertops, is it? There are some serious realities beyond aesthetics, and we're going to uncover them all. Whether you're dreaming of a cozy family home, a super modern masterpiece, or even tackling the whole multi-unit development thing, this is your guide. It's about understanding the rules, but also building for the future, right? So think of this as your shortcut to becoming a well-informed design guru. Now, let's get down to brass tacks and start with the foundation: zoning and land use regulations.
Right off the bat, the most important thing to understand is the LEP, the Local Environmental Plan. It's basically the rule book for how land could be used in a particular area. What you need to know is that the LEP defines zones, whether a plot is for residential, mixed use, or even rural purposes. This isn't just a suggestion, it's the legal framework.
Oh, it's not just a friendly guideline, it's the law, literally. And these zoning rules actually have teeth, don't they? They can really dictate what you can and cannot build. I heard a story about someone who bought this piece of land thinking they could have a little shop front in their home, but nope, the zoning said strictly residential. Dreams dashed.
Exactly. Zoning determines so many key elements of your design. For example, let's say you're in a residential zone. The LEP will probably have restrictions on the maximum height of your building, the minimum size of your lot, and even how many separate dwellings you can have. These aren't random numbers. They're carefully considered to manage growth, infrastructure needs, and the character of the area. Imagine wanting to subdivide your block later. The LEP will have a big say in whether that's even possible.
Right, so you might be picturing this stunning three-story home with a rooftop garden, but if your zoning only permits two stories, well, that rooftop oasis might just be a fantasy. And even if the overall height is okay, there might be restrictions on what you can build on permeable surfaces, like that garden. But the LEP isn't the whole story, is it? We've also got these things called development control plans, or DCPs.
Absolutely. Think of DCPs as the detailed instructions, the fine print that fleshes out the LEP. So the LEP says what you can do, and the DCP tells you exactly how to do it.
So LEP sets the boundaries, DCP fills in the details. What kind of specifics are we talking about in these DCPs?
Oh, they get into all sorts of nitty-gritty details. You'll find regulations on building height, often much more detailed than the LEP. They might specify distance at different parts of the building, even factoring in things like overshadowing neighboring properties at different times of year. Then there are setbacks, those minimum distances your building needs to be from boundaries, neighboring houses, and even the street. This is all about ensuring enough sunlight and ventilation for everyone and preventing overshadowing. And don't forget the floor space ratio, FSR, which controls how much floor area you can build compared to the size of your land. DCPs even cover landscaping, the amount of green space, the types of plants, and of course privacy, outlining how to minimize overlooking neighboring properties.
Got it. So the DCP tells you not just how tall you can build, but how far back from the fence you need to be, and maybe even what kind of trees to plant. Now, our research also mentions state environmental planning policies, or SEPPs. Where do they fit in?
SEPPs are statewide policies addressing specific types of development or environmentally sensitive areas. What's interesting is that sometimes a SEPP can actually override local controls in the LEP or DCP. Think of it like this. The Coastal Management SEPP might impose strict new setback rules if your property is near the coast, even if the local council had approved something different. This is usually for projects deemed significant at the state level or to protect things like wetlands and endangered species habitats.
So if you're near a heritage site or a flood pro area, a SEPP could have the final say, even if your local council has different rules. Sounds like you really need to do your homework on the state level as well.
Exactly. Knowing about any applicable SEPs early on is vital, especially if your site has any unique features or environmental sensitivities. Okay, so the legal framework sets the boundaries, but let's not forget about the land itself. It's time to talk about site and environmental analysis, the real foundation of your dream home.
You got it. You can have all the permits in the world, but if your design clashes with the land itself, you're asking for trouble. Let's start with the shape of the land topography.
Topography, the slope and elevation of your site, has a huge impact on the design. It's like building on a steep, uneven site is a totally different ballgame compared to a flat one. Steep sites might mean complex and expensive foundations, needing retaining walls to manage those level changes, and careful drainage planning to prevent erosion. Picture trying to build a simple rectangular house on a seriously steep block. It can get very tricky and costly fast. On the other hand, flat sites, while they might seem easier at first, can be tricky for natural drainage. You could end up with water pooling issues and might need more creative design solutions to make things interesting and define the cases.
Yeah, a flat block seems straightforward, but it doesn't necessarily handle rainwater as well as a sloping one that can impact your landscaping and even the foundation of the house. And then there's orientation, a fundamental element in designing a comfortable and efficient home.
Absolutely. Orientation is all about how your block, and therefore your house, faces the sun, wind, and any views you want to capture. In NSW, which is in the southern hemisphere, maximizing northern exposure for your main living areas is usually the way to go. This means catching the most sunlight throughout the day, especially in winter, naturally warming your home and cutting down on heating costs.
So it's about using natural light and warmth to brighten and heat your home, saving you money on energy bills and making it a more pleasant place to be. And that leads us right into passive solar design.
Precisely. Passive solar design is all about leveraging the climate to save energy. By orienting your home to capture winter sun and using materials with good thermal mass inside to absorb and release heat, you can naturally heat your home in those colder months. But then you also have to manage the summer heat. That's where shading devices come in, like eaves, pergolas, or strategically placed trees. Deciduous ones that lose their leaves in winter are great for blocking sun in summer but letting it through in winter.
It's a delicate balance, welcoming the winter sun but keeping out the harsh summer glare. And it's not just about the sun, right? Wind plays a huge role too, especially near the coast.
Oh, absolutely. Wind and ventilation are key for a comfortable home and reducing reliance on air conditioning. Designing for cross-ventilation, where you have openings on opposite sides of the house to allow air to flow through, can make a huge difference in keeping things cool and improving air quality. It does take careful planning, considering wind direction, which can change with the seasons, and the placement and size of your windows and doors.
It's all about working with nature instead of always trying to fight it with mechanical systems. Now let's dig a little deeper, literally, and talk about soil. Why is soil testing so important?
Soil testing is non-negotiable. It tells you what you're building on, literally. Specifically, the type and stability of your soil. This is crucial for designing the right foundation for your house. Different soil types, like clay, sand, or rock, have different strengths and react differently to moisture. If you don't have the right foundation, you could end up with cracking or movement over time. Soil tests also tell you how well the ground drains, which is important for stormwater management.
Right, you need to know how well the ground absorbs water, especially in NSW, where we can get some pretty intense rain and even flash floods.
You bet. Stormwater management is a big deal. You've got to plan how to collect rainwater from your roof and hard surfaces and direct it away from your building to prevent flooding your property or your neighbors. This could involve rainwater tanks for reuse, drainage systems with things like swales and pipes, and making sure your house is built high enough to avoid potential flood levels. In flood-prone areas, you might even need to consider sustainable urban drainage systems, or SUDS, which are designed to mimic natural processes for managing water runoff.
So, from the path of the sun to the soil beneath our feet, the site itself influences so much. Now, let's move on to the building itself, its design and layout. It's got to be more than just a pretty face, right? It needs to work for the people who live there.
Functionality is key. The way a house is laid out, the spatial planning, should reflect the people who live there and their lifestyle. It's amazing how a well-thought-out layout can improve daily life and make a house a joy to live in. Think open-plan living areas that feel spacious and encourage interaction, separate private spaces like bedrooms and bathrooms from noisier areas like the kitchen and living room, and smooth flow, how easily you can move through the house without awkward bottlenecks or wasted space.
No more cramped hallways that lead to nowhere or kitchens miles from the dining room. And when it comes to specific rooms, there are some common sense principles, right?
Absolutely. You generally want bedrooms in quieter parts of the house, away from the hustle and bustle of the kitchen and living areas. Kitchens and living rooms, on the other hand, should ideally open up to outdoor spaces, patios, balconies, gardens, blurring the lines between inside and out, taking advantage of natural light, fresh air, and having those spaces for relaxation and recreation.
That indoor-outdoor flow is such a classic part of the Australian lifestyle, isn't it? Now, beyond how the rooms are arranged, there's the overall look at the building, its form, and aesthetics.
The architectural style is a very personal choice. It reflects the homeowner's taste, but it should also consider the surrounding environment. You might go for a traditional style that blends with older homes in the neighborhood, or something more contemporary and minimalist. The materials you choose, brick, timber, and steel, and the roof type, whether it's pitched, flat, or something else entirely, all play a role in the aesthetic and how the building performs in terms of weather protection and energy efficiency.
It's not just about personal taste, it's about fitting into the neighborhood, too.
Right. A well-designed home should integrate with its surroundings. That means respecting the local architectural character, thinking about the size and shape of nearby buildings, and adhering to any heritage guidelines. Some councils have specific rules in their DCPs to preserve the visual harmony of the streetscape or protect historical features.
So your super modern steel and glass box might not be welcome in a neighborhood full of charming Victorian terraces.
Okay, let's move on to an increasingly vital aspect, environmental and sustainability considerations.
This is not an optional extra anymore. It's a must-have for responsible design. Starting with energy efficiency, proper thermal insulation in walls, ceilings, and floors is key. It's like wrapping your house in a thermal blanket, keeping the heat out in summer and the warmth in during winter. Using materials with high thermal mass, like concrete and brick, can also help regulate indoor temperatures by absorbing and slowly releasing heat.
So insulation is key, but windows play a big part in energy efficiency too, don't they? Oh, definitely. Standard single-pane windows can be a major source of heat loss in winter and heat gain in summer. Double-glazed windows, which have two panes of glass with an insulating air gap, are much better at preventing heat transfer. And low emissivity, low-E coatings on the glass can reflect radiant heat, keeping your home cooler in summer and warmer in winter. Of course, the size and orientation of your windows also play a role in maximizing natural light while minimizing unwanted heat gain.
And then there's harnessing the power of the sun itself with solar power.
Solar power is becoming more and more common and affordable. Installing solar PV channels on your roof for electricity, solar hot water systems, and even battery storage to save excess solar energy is a fantastic way to reduce your reliance on the grid and save money on your energy bills in the long run. You might even qualify for incentives or rebates for going solar.
Let's move from managing energy to conserving water. What are some key sustainability considerations there?
Water conservation is so important, especially in Australia. Harvesting rainwater with a tank is a great way to collect water from your roof and use it for things like watering your garden, flushing toilets, and even laundry. Choosing water-efficient fixtures like low-flow shower heads and taps and dual-flush toilets is another simple but effective way to save water. Even your landscaping can make a difference. Using native and drought-tolerant plants will reduce your water needs significantly.
So every bit counts when it comes to conserving water. Now, what about the materials we use to build our homes? Are there more sustainable options available these days?
The choice of sustainable materials is a huge and growing area in the building industry. It's about choosing eco-friendly materials that are renewable, have a low environmental impact, and don't require a lot of energy to produce. Think sustainably sourced timber from responsibly managed forests, bamboo, which is a fast-growing renewable resource, and recycled steel. Even using non-toxic paints and low-vac finishes contributes to healthier indoor air quality. And it's becoming increasingly important to consider the life cycle assessment of a material, its impact from extraction to manufacturing, to use and eventual disposal or recycling. And don't forget about sourcing materials locally whenever possible to cut down on transportation energy and support local businesses.
So it's about thinking about the whole journey of a material from cradle to grave and making choices that minimize our impact. Now let's dive into the not-so-glamorous but absolutely essential world of building codes and compliance. It's what ensures our homes are safe and structurally sound.
It's crucial. The National Construction Code, or NCC, sets the minimum standards for building work in Australia. This big document covers everything from structural integrity, making sure your building can withstand loads and natural forces, to fire safety, accessibility for people with disabilities, and energy efficiency. Any residential design and construction in NSW must comply with the NCC. It's the baseline for safety and performance.
So it's about guaranteeing basic safety and standards. And depending on where you're building, there might be even more specific requirements, right? We touched on SCPPs earlier, but I'm thinking about bushfire-prone areas.
Absolutely. If your site is in a designated bushfire-prone area, there are strict building requirements to minimize fire risk, both to your property and your neighbors. This means carefully choosing materials that are resistant to fire, creating a defensible space around the property by managing vegetation, and ensuring your construction can withstand potential bushfire conditions. You'll likely need a bushfire attack level, BAL assessment, which analyzes the level of risk based on factors like vegetation and distance from the bush to determine what specific standards you need to meet.
That BAL assessment sounds like a must-have for anyone building in a high-risk area. And what about accessibility, making our homes usable for everyone, regardless of age or ability?
Accessibility is so important in modern design. Using universal design principles from the get-go means homes can be used by people of all ages and abilities without needing expensive modifications later on. This could mean wider doorways and hallways for wheelchairs, level or ramped entries instead of steps, and bathrooms designed with features like grab rails and adaptable fixtures. Designing for accessibility not only benefits people with disabilities, but it also makes homes safer and more convenient for everyone, including children and older adults. It's about future-proofing our homes, making them adaptable to changing needs over time.
It's about thinking beyond the immediate and creating homes that work for everyone. Now let's talk about the people living next door, our neighbors. How does design need to take them into account?
Keeping good relationships with neighbors is essential for a happy neighborhood, and design plays a big part in that. Window placement is critical for privacy, both for you and your neighbors. Things like higher window fills, frosted glass in bathrooms, well-placed screens, and landscaping elements like hedges can manage sight lines and ensure privacy without sacrificing natural light.
So you can still have lots of natural light and great views without accidentally looking directly into your neighbor's living room. What about noise, which can be a big source of tension between neighbors?
Noise control is another big one. Using solid core doors and walls, double glazing for windows and doors, and smart spatial planning, placing quieter areas like bedrooms away from noise sources like busy streets, can make a huge difference. Thoughtful landscaping, like planting dense vegetation along property lines, can also act as a sound buffer.
If you're lucky enough to have amazing views, you need to think about how your design interacts with those views, right? Both for your enjoyment and out of consideration for others.
Absolutely. If your site has great views, you should make the most of them. But you also need to be aware that future development might impact those views. And local council zoning regulations might even have view protection controls that limit building heights to protect existing views. It's about balancing your enjoyment with being a good neighbor.
About enjoying your property while respecting those around you. Okay, let's move on to council approvals, the gatekeepers to turning your design dreams into reality.
Getting those approvals is crucial, and preparation is key. For most residential projects, you'll need to lodge a development application, or DA, with your local council. This is a detailed application that shows how your design complies with all the relevant planning rules, mainly the LEP and DCP we talked about earlier. It includes architectural plans, environmental assessments, and other supporting documentation.
So you're showing them your homework, proving that your design follows all the rules, but I heard there's a faster approval route for some projects, right?
Yes, for projects that strictly follow a specific set of predefined rules, there's a streamlined process called a Complying Development Certificate, or CDC. This can bypass the longer DA process through the council and often uses a private certifier for approval, which can be much faster. But the catch is, your design has to meet very specific criteria with little room for variation.
So less bureaucracy, but less flexibility. What if you're dealing with an older property or building in a historically significant area?
Heritage considerations. If your site has a heritage-listed building or is in a heritage conservation area, there will be special rules and limitations on what you can do. These are in place to protect the historical significance of the building or area. There might be restrictions on materials, architectural style, or changes you can make to the original structure. You might even need heritage assessments and expert advice.
It's about balancing modern living with preserving our architectural history. Finally, let's talk about money, cost, and budget management. Building a home is a big financial undertaking.
A huge investment and a well-planned budget is essential. You need to work closely with your architect, builder, and other consultants to factor in all the costs. Not just construction materials and labor, but also design fees, council fees, engineering, landscaping, and, crucially, a contingency fund for unexpected costs. Because believe me, they always come up. Regular budget reviews throughout the project are essential, and you might need to do some value engineering, looking for ways to save money without compromising quality or design intent.
It's about being financially prepared and making smart choices throughout the process. And it's not just about the initial building costs either, right?
Definitely not. When choosing materials and finishes, you also need to think about long-term maintenance. Choosing durable, low-maintenance materials and energy-efficient systems might cost a bit more upfront, but you'll save money in the long run on repairs, maintenance, and energy bills. It's often a more sustainable choice, too.
Thinking ahead pays off. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, literally and figuratively. What would you say is the most important takeaway for anyone embarking on this journey of designing a home in New South Wales?
The big takeaway is this. Designing a home in NSW is a complex process, and it requires a balanced approach. It's about blending your aesthetic vision and functional needs with a commitment to sustainability, understanding the legal frameworks, and respecting your site and its surrounding community.
Every decision, from the first sketches to the final touches, has an impact.
And that leads us to a final thought for you, our listener. We've talked about regulations, environmental factors, design principles. How do you think these elements shape not just individual homes, but also the character and sustainability of our communities here in NSW? What role does thoughtful residential design play in the future of where we live? It's something to think about, even after our deep dive ends.